"Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your boarding pass is no longer valid," the gate agent said softly, and in that single sentence, the family I had loved for more than 40 years disappeared from my life without ever turning around. I stared at the young woman behind the counter, convinced she had confused me with another passenger. I had checked my passport 3 times that morning, folded my boarding pass neatly inside the leather travel wallet my late husband had given me on our 25th wedding anniversary, and arrived at the airport nearly 3 hours before departure because I had always believed rushing only invited mistakes. At 69 years old, I preferred doing things carefully. "There must be some misunderstanding," I replied, sliding the boarding pass back across the counter with a smile that felt steadier than the pounding in my chest. "My son checked all of us in together." The young woman scanned the barcode again. The tiny scanner chirped, and her polite smile slowly faded into something far more uncomfortable. She looked at her monitor, then at me, then back at the screen as though she wished the information would somehow change. "Would you mind waiting just a moment, Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. "I'd like to verify something." Behind me, travelers rolled their suitcases across the polished floor while overhead speakers announced departures to Chicago, Dallas, Seattle, and Paris. Children laughed. Coffee machines hissed. Someone nearby complained about delayed luggage. The airport continued moving as if nothing unusual had happened, yet it suddenly felt as though I were standing completely alone in the middle of it. I glanced toward the security checkpoint where my family had disappeared only minutes earlier. My son, Daniel, had waved casually before placing his phone back into his pocket. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, had smiled without meeting my eyes and reminded him they needed to hurry before boarding began. My granddaughter Emily followed her parents towards security, distracted by her phone and unaware that I had stopped behind them. At the time, I assumed they expected me to catch up after speaking with the airline employee about my seat. Assignment. Families separate for a few minutes at airports all the time. It seemed perfectly ordinary. That was what I kept telling myself. "Mrs. Whitmore," the gate agent said again. "Would you please come with me?" She led me to a quieter service desk away from the growing line of passengers. Her voice remained kind, but I noticed she lowered it as if she did not want others to overhear. "According to our system, your reservation was cancelled." I blinked several times before answering. "Cancelled? That's impossible. I understand this is upsetting." "No," I said gently, still refusing to believe what I had heard. "You don't understand. My family is already past security. We're flying together to Paris." She typed several more commands into her computer, her fingers moving carefully across the keyboard. "I can see the other passengers connected to the reservation. Their tickets remain active." The words settled over me like cold rain. "Then reactivate mine," I said, forcing a small laugh that sounded strangely unfamiliar. "It's obviously a computer mistake." The young woman hesitated just long enough for my confidence to begin slipping away. "I'm afraid I can't do that from here." I looked again toward the security entrance, hoping to see Daniel walking back with that apologetic expression he wore whenever work distracted him. He had always been busy. Even as a teenager, he rushed from one responsibility to another. I had convinced myself for years that his distance came from success, not choice. Vanessa often said she managed the travel details because Daniel's schedule was overwhelming. I had accepted that explanation without question. She booked the flights. She organized the hotel. She collected everyone's passports for online check-in the night before. She insisted it would make the morning easier for all of us. I remembered thanking her. Standing there now, I realized I had never actually seen my own confirmation email. I had simply trusted her when she said everything was taken care of. The gate agent looked toward another employee before returning her attention to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you happen to know anyone else who had access to your reservation?" The question lingered in the air longer than it should have. I opened my mouth to answer automatically, but no words came. For the first time that morning, an uncomfortable memory surfaced. Last night, while we were finishing dinner, Vanessa had smiled across the table and casually asked, "Margaret, you're still using the same email password, right?" At the time, it sounded harmless. Standing in that airport, hearing my boarding pass had somehow vanished while everyone else's remained untouched, that simple question no longer felt harmless at all. I remained standing beside the service desk while the questions inside my head multiplied faster than the answers. Airports have a peculiar way of making time feel different. Every announcement echoed through the terminal with mechanical precision. Every rolling suitcase reminded me that someone else was reaching a destination while I stood completely still. The young airline employee excused herself to contact a supervisor, leaving me alone with my thoughts for the first time that morning. I wrapped both hands around the handle of my small carry-on suitcase, the same navy blue suitcase Harold and I had purchased together nearly 12 years earlier before driving across New England during the fall foliage season. He had always believed that luggage should last longer than fashion, and every scratch on its hard shell carried a memory of somewhere we had smiled together. This trip had never really been about Paris. It had been about keeping a promise. Before Harold passed away 2 years earlier, he had squeezed my hand in his hospital room and smiled with the same calm confidence that had carried us through 45 years of marriage. He had whispered that if I ever had the chance, I should still visit Paris because he knew how often I had dreamed about seeing the Seine at sunset. I laughed through my tears that afternoon and told him we would go together another time. Neither of us admitted that there might not be another time. After he was gone, I packed away that dream beside so many others, convincing myself that some promises were simply meant to stay unfinished. Then Daniel surprised me 3 months earlier by suggesting a family vacation through France. He said Emily had always wanted to see the Eiffel Tower and believed the trip would help all of us create new memories together. Vanessa smiled warmly across the dinner table and insisted the entire family deserved something joyful after the difficult years we had shared. I remember feeling genuinely grateful. Even now, that memory hurt more than I expected because gratitude becomes painfully heavy when it has been misplaced. I had offered to contribute toward the vacation, but one expense after another quietly found its way onto my credit card. The airline tickets, the travel insurance, several hotel deposits, museum reservations, and even a private river cruise had somehow become my responsibility. Vanessa always had a reasonable explanation. Daniel was waiting for a quarterly bonus. Their credit card offered fewer travel rewards. It would be easier if everything stayed under one reservation. Every explanation sounded practical. Every request sounded temporary. I never questioned any of it because families help one another. That was how Harold and I had raised our son. Halfway through organizing the trip, I remembered one evening when Vanessa had sat beside me with her laptop open across the kitchen table. She smiled politely and said, "Margaret, the airline keeps asking me to verify information. Could you write down your email password in case I need to access your confirmation while we are traveling?" I hesitated for only a second before writing it on a small notepad. She thanked me, tore off the page, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her planner. At the time, it seemed like one more practical detail. Standing inside the airport now, that simple moment returned with startling clarity, and an uncomfortable chill settled across my shoulders despite the warm terminal. What if that had not been about convenience at all? Before I could follow the thought any further, the gate agent returned carrying a folder and speaking quietly with a man wearing a dark navy jacket embroidered with the airline logo. His expression remained professional, yet the moment he looked at me, I sensed he already knew more than he was prepared to say. He introduced himself as Michael Brooks, the customer service manager, and apologized for the inconvenience before asking if we could step into a nearby office where we would have more privacy. The request itself made my heartbeat quicken because airline employees do not usually invite passengers into private offices for ordinary reservation errors. As I followed him through a glass door overlooking the terminal, I caught one final glimpse of Flight 218 flashing across the departure board. The word boarding had changed to final call. Somewhere beyond those security checkpoints, my son, my daughter-in-law, and my granddaughter were almost certainly taking their seats. None of them had called. None of them had texted. None of them seemed to realize that I was missing. Or perhaps, a quieter and far more painful possibility began to form inside my mind. Perhaps they already knew exactly where I was. Michael closed the office door gently behind us and opened the reservation file on his computer. He adjusted his glasses, studied the screen for several long seconds, and then looked directly into my eyes with the kind of expression people wear when they are about to deliver news they wish did not belong to them. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said carefully, "there is one detail in your reservation history that I believe you need to see for yourself." Michael rotated the monitor just enough for me to read the reservation history without crossing the desk between us. I had spent enough years volunteering at the public library to recognize a computer activity log even if I did not understand every technical detail. There were timestamps, confirmation numbers, and notes entered by the reservation system. Most of them meant very little to me until Michael pointed to a single line highlighted in pale yellow. "Your reservation was cancelled 53 minutes ago," he said quietly. I frowned. "By the airline?" He slowly shook his head. "No, ma'am. It was cancelled through the online customer portal." I stared at the screen, waiting for him to continue. "That means someone signed into the reservation using the correct account credentials." My mouth suddenly felt dry. "Can you tell who?" Michael folded his hands together before answering. "For privacy reasons, I cannot identify an individual without authorization. However, I can confirm that whoever accessed the reservation successfully entered the correct email address and password on the first attempt." The room fell silent except for the faint sound of boarding announcements outside the office. My thoughts drifted back to the small sheet of paper I had handed Vanessa at my kitchen table. I could picture her folding it carefully before slipping it into her planner. At the time, I had admired how organized she always seemed. Now I wondered if organization and manipulation had been standing side by side all along while I chose to notice only the first. Michael continued scrolling through the activity history. "There is something else that concerns me." My eyes followed the cursor. The reservation had not simply been cancelled. My seat had disappeared, yet every other passenger connected to the booking remained confirmed exactly as scheduled. Daniel, Vanessa, Emily. 3 active boarding passes. 1 cancelled reservation. It was too precise to resemble an accident. Could a computer malfunction do something like that? I asked, even though I already knew the answer I wanted no part of. Michael answered gently. "In my experience, system errors usually affect an entire reservation or produce duplicate bookings. It is extremely unusual for only one traveler to be removed while everyone else remains untouched." I looked down at my wedding ring. I still wore it every day even after Harold's passing. Some people had suggested placing it in a jewelry box, but removing it had never felt right. My thumb rested against the smooth gold band as another memory quietly surfaced. 2 weeks before our departure, Vanessa had insisted we should all download the airline application because it would make boarding easier. She had taken my phone, saying the font was too small for me to navigate comfortably. She spent several minutes tapping through screens while chatting casually about restaurants in Paris. I had not thought about that moment again until now. What exactly had she been doing with my account? A heavy feeling settled over me, not because I had proof, but because too many ordinary moments were suddenly fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to assemble. Michael noticed my expression but did not interrupt. He allowed the silence to do what words could not. After nearly a minute, I asked the question that frightened me most. If someone canceled my ticket, why would they do that? He answered with remarkable honesty. "I do not know, Mrs. Whitmore. Sometimes there are financial disputes. Sometimes family misunderstandings. Sometimes people believe they are helping when they are actually making decisions for someone else. I cannot speculate beyond the reservation history." His professionalism somehow made the truth feel even heavier. He was careful not to accuse anyone, yet nothing he said gave me reason to believe this had happened by chance. My phone remained silent in my purse. No missed calls. No messages from Daniel asking where I was. No text from Vanessa wondering why I had not reached the gate. I unlocked the screen and opened our family group conversation. The last message was mine from that morning. "I am at Terminal C with coffee. Looking forward to making memories together." Beneath it, Emily had replied with a smiling heart emoji. Nothing else. I considered calling Daniel, but something stopped me. If he truly believed I had accidentally wandered away from the gate, he would already be trying to reach me. The absence of concern spoke louder than any explanation he might offer later. Michael excused himself briefly to check whether another flight to Paris might be available later that evening. I remained alone in the office, staring through the glass wall toward the busy terminal. Families embraced before departures. Children pointed excitedly at airplanes outside the windows. Elderly couples held hands while waiting to board. The ordinary kindness surrounding me somehow magnified the loneliness I was trying so hard to keep hidden. It was not until the airplane doors had closed that Emily finally realized the seat beside her father was empty. Then my phone vibrated once against my palm. Relief rushed through me as I assumed Daniel had finally realized I was missing. Instead, the message came from Vanessa. It contained only 6 words. Did everything work out all right? I read the sentence again and again. She had not asked where I was. She had not asked whether I had boarded. She had not sounded surprised. It felt less like a question and more like someone quietly checking whether a carefully arranged plan had succeeded. Before I could decide whether to answer, Michael returned carrying a printed report, and the first sentence out of his mouth made my heart skip. Mrs. Whitmore, we found one additional login connected to your reservation, and the timestamp changes everything. I looked at Michael without saying a word. After everything I had already learned that morning, I was no longer sure I wanted another answer. Sometimes the truth arrives in such small pieces that each one hurts more than the last. He placed the printed report on the desk between us, careful not to push it directly into my hands. There were 2 successful logins to your reservation today, he explained. The first occurred shortly after 7 o'clock this morning from a residential internet connection. The second happened here at the airport approximately 1 hour before departure using the airport wireless network. I lowered my eyes to the report. I did not understand every technical detail, but I understood the timestamps. One action had prepared the reservation. The second had completed it. Can you tell where inside the airport? I asked. Michael gave an apologetic smile. Unfortunately, our system cannot identify a specific location inside the terminal. It only confirms the public wireless network. I slowly nodded, trying to absorb the information without letting my emotions outrun my judgment. Harold had always reminded me that facts deserved patience. Whenever something unexpected happened, he would pour himself another cup of coffee before making a decision. Never let your first emotion become your final conclusion, he often said. I repeated those words silently now because they were the only thing keeping me steady. I opened my purse and removed the small travel folder I had prepared weeks earlier. Every reservation, receipt, passport copy, and emergency phone number had been organized exactly the way Harold taught me. As I flipped through the papers, one detail immediately caught my attention. I had printed 4 complete airline itineraries several days before departure. My itinerary showed seat 21A, Daniel was assigned 21B, Vanessa occupied 21C, Emily sat directly across the aisle in 21D. We had been seated together from the beginning. I handed the itinerary to Michael. He compared it with the current reservation displayed on his monitor. This confirms your original seat assignment, he said. Someone intentionally removed only your segment from the booking. Hearing him describe it so plainly made the room feel noticeably smaller. Until that moment, part of me still wanted to believe there had been some complicated misunderstanding. Those last few words quietly closed the door on that possibility. Someone had not simply made a mistake. Someone had made a choice. My phone rested on the desk beside me. Vanessa's message remained unanswered. 6 ordinary words. Did everything work out all right? The sentence seemed almost rehearsed now. If she genuinely believed I had boarded, why would she ask whether everything worked out? If she believed I had missed the flight accidentally, why had Daniel not called? Neither question had a comforting answer. Michael excused himself briefly to speak with another department regarding possible travel options. While I waited, I found myself staring through the office window again. Another family gathered near the gate, laughing as a little boy proudly carried his own backpack. His grandmother adjusted his baseball cap before kissing his forehead. The scene lasted only a few seconds, yet it reminded me of Daniel when he was 8 years old, standing beside me at O'Hare Airport before his first flight to visit his grandparents in Arizona. He had been terrified of flying. He refused to let go of my hand until the boarding announcement. Even after reaching the jet bridge, he looked back 3 separate times just to make sure I was still there smiling at him. I smiled every single time because that was what mothers did. They stood exactly where their children expected to find them. Somewhere along the years, that little boy had become a man who boarded an international flight without noticing his mother was missing. Or perhaps he had noticed. That possibility hurt far more. My thoughts were interrupted by another vibration from my phone. This time the message came from Emily. "Grandma, where are you?" Relief washed over me so suddenly that my eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. At least one person had realized I was not there. I quickly typed, "I am still at the airport, sweetheart. I will explain later. Are you already on the airplane?" Before I could press send, another message appeared from her. "Dad says you decided not to come because you were not feeling well." I stared at those words until they blurred together. Daniel had already given Emily an explanation. Not confusion. Not concern. An explanation. My thumb hovered above the screen. I wanted to tell her everything immediately, but she was only 14 years old. She did not deserve to become trapped in the middle of something she could not fully understand. I simply replied, "I love you very much. We will talk when you get home." A few seconds later, 3 small dots appeared, showing that she was typing another message. Before her reply arrived, Michael returned carrying a tablet instead of another printed report. His expression had changed. The quiet professionalism remained, but there was now unmistakable concern behind it. He placed the tablet in front of me and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, airport security was able to confirm one additional detail from this morning. I believe you should see this before you decide what to do next." I looked at the tablet as Michael gently slid it across the desk. The screen displayed several still images captured from security cameras inside the terminal. They were grainy, time-stamped, and taken from different angles, but the people in them were unmistakable. In the first image, Daniel and Vanessa stood together near a self-service kiosk while Emily sat on one of our suitcases scrolling through her phone. I noticed something I had completely missed that morning. Vanessa was holding not only her own phone but mine as well. I remembered handing it to her while I adjusted my scarf because she had offered to pull up my digital boarding pass. At the time, I thought she was simply helping me move through the airport more efficiently. Michael enlarged the second image. The timestamp matched the second login recorded in my reservation history. Vanessa was standing alone only a few feet away from the kiosk, looking down at the screen in her hands while Daniel spoke with Emily several yards away. No one else appeared close enough to see what she was doing. "We cannot see the phone display," Michael explained carefully. "Security cameras are not designed for that level of detail. However, this timestamp aligns almost exactly with the cancellation recorded in your reservation." I continued studying the image. Vanessa's posture looked calm, almost relaxed. There was nothing hurried about her movements. She did not appear confused or frustrated the way someone might if they were struggling with a technical issue. She simply stood there, focused, as though completing a task she had already planned. My chest tightened, but I refused to let anger replace clear thinking. Harold had always believed that assumptions were dangerous, even when they seemed obvious. Facts first. Emotions later. That principle had guided our marriage, our finances, and the way we raised Daniel. Somewhere along the way, Daniel must have forgotten it. Michael quietly closed the tablet. "Mrs. Whitmore, I want to be very careful with what I say. These images do not prove intent. They simply establish a timeline." I appreciated his honesty. Too many people rush to conclusions because certainty feels more comfortable than uncertainty. Yet sometimes the truth becomes visible through many small facts instead of one dramatic revelation. I thanked him for treating me with respect. He smiled gently before asking, would you like me to explore options for getting you to Paris on a later flight? The question lingered in the room. Just a few hours earlier, I would have answered without hesitation. Of course I wanted to join my family. That had been the entire purpose of this journey. But now the idea of arriving in Paris unexpectedly while pretending nothing had happened felt strangely wrong. If someone had deliberately arranged for me to remain behind, showing up without understanding why would solve nothing. I needed answers before I needed another boarding pass. As I considered my response, my phone buzzed again. Emily had finally replied. Grandma, I told Dad I wanted to wait for you, but he said the airline would help you catch another flight. Vanessa said everything was already taken care of. I read the message twice. Emily's words carried none of the careful wording adults often use when hiding uncomfortable truths. Children simply repeat what they hear. That honesty made her message more valuable than she probably realized. Vanessa had expected the airline to take care of me. She had anticipated my absence before the plane ever left the gate. A quiet realization settled over me. This had never been about forgetting me. It had been about separating me from them while making the situation appear unavoidable. I typed back only one sentence. Thank you for telling me the truth, sweetheart. Almost immediately, 3 little dots appeared again as Emily began typing another message. Before it arrived, Michael's office phone rang. He answered, listened silently for nearly a minute, then thanked the caller and slowly placed the receiver back into its cradle. His expression had become noticeably more serious. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, our information technology department completed one additional review. They found something unusual involving the email confirmation that was automatically generated after your reservation was cancelled. My heartbeat quickened again. What does that mean? He turned the monitor toward me once more. Normally, when a reservation is cancelled, the confirmation email is delivered to the account holder immediately. According to our records, your cancellation notice was successfully sent. I frowned. I never received one. Michael nodded. That is exactly why we kept investigating. He clicked another window, revealing several technical details I barely understood. Then he pointed toward a single line highlighted in blue. Mrs. Whitmore, the confirmation email was not sent to the address you have been using for years. According to our system, your account's recovery email had been changed just 48 hours before your trip, and the replacement address begins with the initials VW. For several long seconds, I simply stared at the letters on Michael's screen. VW. They were only 2 initials, yet they carried more weight than an entire conversation. Vanessa Whitmore. Of course, initials alone could not prove anything. Thousands of people shared those same letters. But when I placed them beside everything else that had happened that morning, they no longer looked like coincidence. They looked like another piece of a picture that had been quietly forming all day. Michael folded his hands and spoke with the same calm professionalism that had earned my trust from the moment we met. Mrs. Whitmore, I understand this information is upsetting. Please remember that we are discussing system records, not legal conclusions. I simply want you to have an accurate understanding of what occurred within your reservation. I appreciated the distinction. Harold had spent his career as an accountant, and he often reminded Daniel that facts were strongest when they were left untouched by exaggeration. Looking at those records, I realized the facts alone were painful enough. They needed no embellishment. I asked Michael one question that had been lingering in my mind ever since I stepped into his office. If someone changed my recovery email, would I have received any warning? He opened another page on the computer and nodded slowly. Normally, yes. The account holder receives a notification asking whether the change was authorized. However, if the person already had access to your primary email account, those notifications could have been deleted before you ever saw them. A memory surfaced so suddenly that I actually closed my eyes. About a month earlier, Vanessa had stopped by my house one Saturday afternoon because she claimed my laptop seemed unusually slow. She insisted she could install software updates while we enjoyed coffee together. I remembered leaving her alone in my home office for nearly half an hour while I baked blueberry muffins in the kitchen. When she returned, she smiled proudly and said everything was running perfectly again. I had thanked her. Now I wondered how many things had quietly changed during those 30 minutes besides software updates. The realization did not fill me with anger. It filled me with disappointment so deep that it almost felt peaceful. There comes a point when the heart becomes too tired to break again. Instead, it simply grows quiet. Michael interrupted my thoughts gently. Would you like us to help you secure your account before anything else happens? I nodded immediately. Together we reset my airline password, restored my original recovery email, and added additional verification to prevent future access. The process took less than 10 minutes, yet with every step I felt as though I were slowly reclaiming something much larger than an online account. I was reclaiming the ability to trust my own judgment again. Halfway through resetting everything, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared across the screen. For a brief moment I considered letting it ring unanswered. Instead, I accepted the call. Hi, Mom, he said with surprising calmness. The sound of muffled airport announcements had been replaced by the quiet hum of an airplane cabin. We are about to take off. Vanessa said the airline was helping you catch the evening flight. Are you all set? His voice carried no panic, no urgency, not even mild confusion. It sounded exactly like someone confirming a dinner reservation. I answered carefully. Daniel, did you know my reservation had been cancelled? There was a pause lasting only a second or two. Vanessa mentioned there was some kind of computer issue. She said the airline would fix everything. Another silence followed. I waited for him to ask whether I was all right. He never did. Instead he said, Mom, they are asking us to switch our phones to airplane mode. We will talk after we land. Before I could respond, the line disconnected. I lowered the phone slowly and looked at Michael. He did not ask what had been said. He did not need to. My expression answered the question for him. Daniel had accepted Vanessa's explanation without ever confirming a single fact for himself. Whether he had been deceived or had chosen not to ask difficult questions, I still did not know. But one truth had become impossible to ignore. Not once during that conversation had he sounded surprised that I was not sitting on the airplane with them. A few minutes later, after completing the account security updates, Michael handed me a printed confirmation packet. Everything connected to your airline profile has now been restored, he said. No one else should be able to access it without your authorization. I thanked him sincerely. Kindness from a stranger often stands out most clearly after disappointment from family. As I slipped the papers into my travel folder, another notification appeared on my phone. It was not from Daniel. It was not from Vanessa. It was from my bank. The message informed me that a recent request had been submitted to increase the daily spending limit on the credit card I had used to purchase nearly every expense for the family vacation. The request had been made less than 1 hour before boarding, and according to the notification, it was still waiting for my approval. I stared at the banking notification for several seconds before tapping it open. The request was simple enough on the surface. Someone had attempted to raise my daily credit card spending limit from $5,000 to $20,000 for international travel. The request had not been approved because my bank required confirmation through my personal device. Without that confirmation, the higher limit would never take effect. I slowly exhaled, realizing that if I had boarded the flight without interruption, I might never have noticed the alert until much later. Michael looked at me with quiet concern. Is everything all right? I turned the screen toward him. Someone tried to increase my spending limit. He read the notification without commenting on who might have submitted the request. Instead, he simply said, you should probably contact your bank before making any other decisions today. His advice sounded so reasonable that I followed it immediately. Within minutes I was connected to a representative from the bank's fraud prevention department. The woman introduced herself as Rebecca and patiently verified my identity before reviewing the activity on my account. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, I can confirm that the spending limit request was not completed because the final authorization was never received from your mobile device. I thanked her and asked whether there had been any other unusual activity connected to my account. There was a brief pause as she continued searching. Actually, she replied, there were 2 additional attempts this morning to add your credit card to a new digital wallet on another mobile phone. Those requests also failed because secondary verification was required. I closed my eyes for a moment. One event could be explained away. 2 might still be coincidence. But every new fact seemed to fit perfectly beside the others. Rebecca recommended that I temporarily freeze my card until I decided how I wanted to proceed. I agreed without hesitation. Less than a minute later, every charge connected to that card would require my direct approval before processing. As soon as the freeze became active, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time all morning, I was no longer reacting to someone else's decisions. I was making my own. Michael offered me a cup of coffee while I finished the call. The simple kindness reminded me how much dignity can be restored through ordinary acts of respect. We sat quietly for several minutes, neither of us feeling the need to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation. Then my phone vibrated again. This time the notification came from the travel booking application. Several reservations connected to our Paris itinerary required payment verification before check-in could be completed at the hotel. Normally, I would have approved the request immediately without a second thought. Instead, I simply stared at it. Nearly every reservation had been placed using my credit card because Vanessa insisted it was easier to keep everything under one account. She promised everyone would reimburse me after the trip. I had believed her because I wanted to believe my family still operated on trust. Michael noticed the notification appear on my screen. You do not have to decide anything immediately, he said gently. He was right. For years I had been solving problems as quickly as possible because I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting the family. Harold used to smile whenever I apologized for worrying too much. Margaret, he would say, sometimes waiting one day reveals more than arguing for 1 hour. His voice echoed in my memory so clearly that I almost smiled. Perhaps this was one of those moments. I locked my phone without approving the payment request. If the reservations truly belonged to all of us, they could wait until everyone was willing to speak honestly. About 20 minutes passed before another call arrived. This time it came from an unfamiliar international number. I hesitated before answering. Mrs. Whitmore, a polite female voice asked. This is Sophie from the Grand Palais Hotel in Paris. We are contacting you because the primary payment method associated with your family's reservation is no longer processing successfully. We wanted to verify whether you wish to provide another form of payment before your guests arrive. I thanked her warmly and explained that I needed a little more time before making any decisions. She completely understood and assured me the reservation would remain pending for several hours. When the call ended, I realized something important. My family had probably not yet discovered any problem. They were still somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, believing every reservation, dinner, museum ticket, and hotel suite remained exactly as planned. None of them knew that the woman they had quietly left behind was also the person responsible for nearly every payment awaiting them on the other side of the ocean. I felt no satisfaction in that realization. Only clarity. There is a difference between revenge and refusing to continue being taken for granted. One comes from anger. The other comes from self-respect. As I slipped my phone back into my purse, it vibrated once more. A new email had just arrived in my restored inbox. The sender's name immediately caught my attention. It was not from the airline, the bank, or the hotel. It was from Harold's longtime attorney, a man I had not spoken with in nearly a year. The subject line contained only 7 words, Margaret, I believe you should read this today. I opened the email from Harold's attorney while sitting quietly in Michael's office, almost afraid that one more unexpected discovery might finally overwhelm me. Instead of a long explanation, there were only a few carefully written sentences. Margaret, I have attempted to reach you for several weeks regarding an annual review of the Whitmore Family Trust. Since I have been unable to contact you, I felt it was important to write today after receiving several unusual inquiries from members of your family. My heartbeat slowed rather than quickened. Harold had established the family trust years before his retirement, mostly to simplify financial planning and charitable donations. We reviewed it every year without fail. After he passed away, I continued honoring that routine because it felt like keeping one small promise to him. The attorney continued, earlier this month, I received requests asking whether authority over certain travel and discretionary accounts could be delegated while you were overseas. I declined because your approval is required for any modification. I read the paragraph twice before looking out the office window toward the busy terminal. Delegated authority. Overseas. Those words suddenly connected with the spending limit request, the altered recovery email, and the cancelled reservation. Someone had apparently expected me to be thousands of miles away while administrative changes quietly moved forward at home. I still refused to accuse anyone without complete certainty, but the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Michael noticed that my expression had changed. Bad news? He asked gently. Not exactly, I answered. Perhaps it is simply the first honest news I have received all day. He nodded without asking to read the message. I appreciated that restraint. Respect often appears in what people choose not to demand. I replied briefly to the attorney, explaining that I remained in the United States because unexpected travel complications had delayed my departure and asking whether he would be available for a meeting the following morning. His response arrived less than 5 minutes later. Absolutely. There are several documents I believe you should review in person before making any further financial decisions. I slipped the phone back into my purse and felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me. For hours I had been chasing answers. Now the answers seemed to be finding me one by one. Before I could gather my thoughts further, another notification appeared. This time it came from the hotel reservation system. The grace period for payment verification would expire in 3 hours unless the primary account holder confirmed the booking. I looked at the message without touching the screen. Michael quietly observed my hesitation. May I offer one suggestion? He asked. I smiled. Please. Whatever you decide, make sure it reflects the person you want to be tomorrow, not simply the person who was hurt today. His words reminded me so much of Harold that I almost laughed. Good advice often sounds timeless because it belongs to character rather than circumstance. I thanked him and left the notification unanswered. If my family eventually contacted me honestly, we could discuss the reservations together. If they continued pretending nothing had happened, delaying payment seemed entirely reasonable until the truth had a chance to catch up with everyone. Nearly 2 hours passed before my phone finally rang again. This time the caller was Daniel. The connection sounded clearer now. They had apparently landed in Paris. Mom, he began, sounding noticeably more anxious than before, the hotel says there is an issue with the payment authorization. They cannot release all of the rooms until the reservation is verified. Did something happen with your credit card? I remained quiet for a moment before answering. Daniel, something did happen today. He sighed heavily. Can we solve the hotel problem first? Everyone is exhausted after the flight. His choice of words settled heavily inside me. Not, are you all right? Not, what happened to you? Only concern about the hotel. I answered calmly. Daniel, before we discuss payments, I need you to answer one question honestly. When you boarded the airplane this morning, did you know I was still in the terminal? The line became completely silent. I could hear distant voices around him and the faint sound of rolling luggage across polished floors. Finally he spoke. Vanessa told me you had decided to take a later flight because you wanted some time alone after feeling overwhelmed. I closed my eyes. That explanation sounded carefully prepared, simple enough to discourage additional questions. Did you ever call to confirm that with me? I asked softly. Another silence followed. No, he admitted. I believed her. Those 3 words carried more sadness than anger. I had not lost my son in a single dramatic moment. I had been losing him one unquestioned assumption at a time. Before I could respond, another voice suddenly entered the call. It was Vanessa. Her tone remained warm, polished, and perfectly composed. Margaret, thank goodness we finally reached you. There has clearly been one huge misunderstanding, and I think it would be much easier if we all talked once we get settled into the hotel. For a brief moment, I said nothing. I could hear the quiet bustle of the hotel lobby on Vanessa's end of the call, the distant voices of travelers checking in, the rolling of suitcases across polished marble floors, and someone greeting guests in French. On my side, there was only the calm hum of the airport office where complete strangers had shown me more patience and honesty than my own family had offered all day. Vanessa, I said at last, keeping my voice steady, a misunderstanding happens when people are confused. This morning, someone canceled only my reservation, changed my recovery email, attempted to increase the spending limit on my credit card, and expected me to pay for a vacation I never boarded. That is much more than a misunderstanding. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then she laughed softly, almost nervously. Margaret, you are putting unrelated things together. We can explain everything when we get home. Before I could answer, Daniel spoke again. His voice sounded tired, but underneath the exhaustion I heard something I had not heard in years. Doubt. Mom, what exactly happened after we went through security? I realized then that this was the first genuine question he had asked me all day. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone. I simply told him the truth from beginning to end. I described the canceled reservation, the airline records, the recovery email, the banking alerts, and the unanswered messages. I even told him how Emily had been informed that I had supposedly decided not to travel. No dramatic language was necessary. The facts carried enough weight on their own. When I finished speaking, Daniel remained completely silent. Finally he asked only one question. Vanessa, did you have Mom's email password? I did not hear her answer immediately. Instead, I heard another long pause followed by, Daniel, this is not the place for this conversation. That response seemed to answer him more clearly than any explanation could have. I ended the call politely. We will talk when everyone is back home. Travel safely. Then I set my phone on the desk and felt something inside me become unexpectedly light. I had spent years believing that keeping peace required accepting every disappointment without complaint. Harold had understood something I had needed much longer to learn. Peace without honesty is only silence. The following morning I met Harold's attorney exactly as planned. He welcomed me into his office with genuine concern after hearing what had happened at the airport. Together we reviewed every trust document, every financial authorization, every account connected to our family estate. Nothing had been changed because every request required my direct approval. We strengthened additional protections, updated emergency contacts, removed unnecessary shared access, and documented every unusual event from the previous day. None of those decisions came from anger. They came from responsibility. Harold had worked too hard building a secure future for our family to allow carelessness or manipulation to place it at risk. 3 days later, Daniel returned home earlier than expected. He stood on my front porch holding no gifts, no flowers, and no rehearsed speech. He simply looked older than he had a week before. When I opened the door, he removed his sunglasses and quietly said, Mom, I should have looked back. Those 5 words reached me more deeply than any elaborate apology could have. He explained that once they arrived in Paris, one inconsistency after another had forced difficult conversations. Emily admitted what she had been told before boarding. The hotel payment issues exposed how many reservations depended entirely on my accounts. Questions that had been ignored at the airport could no longer be avoided. Whether Vanessa acted out of convenience, control, poor judgment, or something else entirely would be a matter they needed to resolve honestly. That responsibility no longer belonged to me. I invited Daniel inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, and listened more than I spoke. For the first time in many years, he was not asking me to fix a problem. He was finally willing to understand one. As for Vanessa, she contacted me several times during the following weeks. Her messages grew gradually less confident and more reflective. I answered only after I felt ready, and when we eventually met, I spoke calmly, without bitterness. Trust, I told her, is not restored through explanations alone. It is rebuilt through consistent actions over time. Whether that would ever happen remained uncertain, but uncertainty is more honest than pretending nothing occurred. Emily visited the next weekend. She wrapped her arms around me before saying a single word. We baked blueberry muffins together, just as Harold had loved, and she asked if one day we could still visit Paris. I smiled and told her I would like that very much. Only next time, we would each carry our own boarding pass. Several months later, I finally stood beside the Seine as the evening lights reflected across the water. The trip was quieter than I had once imagined, but somehow far more meaningful. I walked at my own pace, chose my own destinations, and paused wherever I wished without feeling like an inconvenience to anyone. I realized then that the most important journey I had taken was never across the Atlantic Ocean. It began the moment I stopped confusing sacrifice with love and silence with kindness. Looking back now, I no longer remember that airport as the place where my family left me behind. I remember it as the place where I found myself again, because sometimes the people who fail to look back unknowingly give you the clearest view of the road ahead.